Hi, and welcome to Smuggling Hope, episode 60. And this will be the first, I would hope, of a long run of video podcasts. So we're going to be moving things to YouTube. So if you haven't watched this video, go to YouTube, subscribe, please. And all of your subscriptions that you do, anytime you click or give me a 5-star review or whatever you think I deserve, that really helps bump up the algorithm so that the content that you may find is helpful for you or your family or your loved ones can meet other people's attention, right? So, I really am trying to, reach as many people as possible so that this information gets to people. So that's really my mission. So thank you for your continued feedback and support. Again, if you're a new viewer, I guess this is a Catholic podcast, but it's designed to bring truth, freedom, and love to as many people as will listen to this stuff. And we want to make sure that people have greater freedom in this world. And today we're going to be talking about forgiveness, and forgiveness is weird. So that's going to be the topic of today's episode. And I'm going to go through that actually through that lens of truth, freedom, and love. So it's a good building block. But before I kind of get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, I really do want to say thank you for all of those that have been encouraging other people to go on and check out all of the stuff that we're doing at heartsrenewed.org. That is our free resources over there for marriage, to have remarkable marriages. A lot of people, their relationships are kind of like roommates, and that's not really what marriage is supposed to feel like or be. So there's a bunch of free resources there, as well as the online marriage program. If you want to try it, you can try it for a week for $1. And considering the cost of marriage therapy, I would say, it's far worth it. I mean, I spent 7 years trying to put that whole thing together for you. So hopefully, if you want to take a look at it, I think it's well worth the investment if you care about your spouse. The shameless plug is over, right? So on to the show. So today, episode 60, first in the line of video productions I guess I'm doing, right? So hopefully I get my new hair and makeup person. I had a ring light, right? So I was doing this nice and professional like, but my kids took my ring light and they broke it. I think they made a bunch of, the good news is they made a bunch of ridiculous videos, I think mocking me out. So they were entertaining. I don't think they're gonna be on this YouTube channel. So yeah, sorry about that, guys. So I'm going to start with the story. Usually on this podcast, we'll start with the story, and today I'm going to start with one of the ones I enjoy a great deal. And so a couple years ago, I watched the Dalai Lama in an interview, and I can't remember if the talk show he was put on was in some part of, I think it was South Korea. He may have been someplace else. I can't recall. But the person who was interviewing the Dalai Lama, and if you're not familiar who that person is, the Dalai Lama is in Tibetan culture seen as the embodiment of the compassion God incarnate, right? So the Dalai Lama is sitting down at this talk show with this late night talk show with this I think it's a South Korean interviewer. And the man is very upset, the interviewer, the talk show host. He starts to get very angry at the Dalai Lama and says that he has failed his people, the people of Tibet. And he says, you're incredibly selfish old man. Your people are persecuted by the Chinese because of you. They are being killed, and they are doing all of this because you've refused to return home to Tibet. If you would just turn yourself into the Chinese, none of this bloodshed would have happened, blah blah blah. And the Dalai Lama waits for this man to take his breath, and he says, thank you. And the talk show host gets a little taken aback, and he gets a little irritated, and he goes, well, why you say that? Don't you understand how ignorant you have been? You are a fake. You are a fake holy man. You are a joke. You are a fraud. I can't believe that you can sit here in front of all these people and pretend that you believe in love and that you believe in peace when your existence, your behaviors is causing all of this wreckage for the Tibetan people and the Chinese government. And the Dalai Lama again says, Thank you very much. At this point, the talk show host loses his mind and gets enraged and goes, I can't deal with this anymore. Why do you keep saying thank you? Don't you understand an insult, old man? And this man, the talk show host starts to catch his breath, panting quite heavily, and the Dalai Lama can read that his breathing has shifted, and he waits for him to calm down, and he says to him, he says, so, my son, you know, uh, it is, it is, uh, it is as if you give me a gift. You give me a gift, and uh, and think of it like a box, and in that box there is some type of poop, right? Like elephant poop. You give me this box, and in it looks like a gift, and inside is elephant poop, and you give it to me, and I open it up, and I go, ooh, not for me. So I box it back up, and to be polite, I give it back to you. I give it back to you. It's not for me. And so forgiveness is just like that. It is like when people give us boxes of crap, essentially, and we choose to hold it temporarily and then give it back. Or give means to, in many ways, to give back. So we are not holding on to these things. We're giving them back. And it's important because a lot of times as people, we get into these ruts where we have things that happen to us and then we feel obliged to hold on to these slights, hold on to these injuries. And it's important that we cultivate a flexibility. When you think about the flexibility of the body and you think about the flexibility of the mind, I want you to think that they are both two sides of the same coin of health. If you are mentally healthy, a healthy mental person, a person who's mentally strong and mentally healthy is incredibly flexible. They can hold multiple things in their mind at the same time, which is actually a very high level of skill to hold two opposing viewpoints, two opposing ideas, and balance them. And the same thing is true for the body. A person who is very soft and is flexible, they are going to be very much more physically healthy. If someone is rigid and tense, they're going to injure their body. They're going to injure their muscles, their bones. They're going to damage their body. And it's weird, as we age, we collect more and more fears in the body. It's like if you ask a 30-year-old to fall on the ground, they can't do it. But you ask a 3-year-old, they fall all the time. 30-year-old is afraid of falling. Forget it. By the time you're 70, you're breaking a hip and dying, right? So there's these fears. And for us as people, you'll see the same thing is true. As a young person, when we are young, we have no falsity, really, in some ways. We really are, because our ability to have reason really fully develops around 8, right? 7 or 8. That's why in the Catholic tradition we have our children begin reconciliation, the sacrament of confession. So because they're having to encounter the truth in a lot of ways and be deceptive, but little kids abide in truth. They're not, because they're not afraid necessarily, right? There's not a lot of fears with a little kid. They're fearless, right? They're running into the street. They're burning themselves if they're not careful. They're the cat that you own or the dog that your neighbor owns that doesn't like kids. They want to pet it and grab it. The bunny that wants to bite people's fingers off, whatever. Kids are fearless. But as we get older, it becomes harder and harder sometimes for us to be relaxed and for us to stay engaged with the truth. And so one of the first things I want you to think about with this whole idea of forgiveness is that forgiveness, the primary goal of forgiveness is it's for you, right? Forgiveness is for you to be free, so that those experiences don't get stuck in you. Because if they get stuck in you, if you end up, as the Dalai Lama kind of put it, holding this box of poop or crap, which I don't think you really want to, things start to smell. You kind of need to wash your hands a lot, and there's no reason for it. But think about it. People that they take these things home and then they put them in a closet, or they put them in a room, or they put them on their table. I mean, it's just like, if you have something bad that's happened and you take it with you everywhere, right? You take that box of elephant poop everywhere. It's like when you talk about what your parents did to you, what your friend did to you, what your ex did to you, what your boss did to you. You're bringing all of this around, and it really distorts the environment psychologically, spiritually, and it makes people not really want to be around you. Do people want to? I mean, you remember the Peanuts gang? They had, the character of Pigpen, who was the guy with all the flies buzzing around. And sometimes I think about unforgiveness as that state that really keeps people away. And again, for good reason, but at the same time, these injuries are things that we need to kind of move out. So we're going to talk about how to move these injuries out, because forgiveness will promote freedom. It will also promote a fullness of the self, where all the pieces can be collected. Because if I've forgiven, well, now I have the ability to come back together. I can collect myself, and be a whole person. In Catholicism, we talk a lot about holiness, and I think sometimes we miss out on the fact that holiness means that I'm fully present, I'm fully alive, I'm full as a person, and there's nothing that's separated. And for a lot of people, they get injured, and that injury to themselves because of abuse, neglect, hurt, calumny, people betraying their trust, people saying horrible things, people breaking their heart, whatever it is, they start to get broken off. They start to get fractured, and that fracturing, um, it, it it perpetuates, and it cuts them off from the love of their family. It cuts them off from the next person who would want to care for them, and then it makes them in danger of choosing hell. Remember, suffering is the thing that gives us one of the greatest temptations into selfishness. Right? Suffering tempts us into selfishness. It's like if maybe I've used it on this podcast before, but if I have a toothache and I'm talking to you, and you tell me that 400 people just got killed in a terrible earthquake downtown. Well, my question is not going to be about the earthquake or the 400 people. My question is going to be, do you know a dentist? When people suffer, they're very much tempted into selfishness, and that's what pain does. So we either go into ourself, which is hell, or we start to move out towards Christ, which is what heaven is, right? You go to heaven the degree you go to Christ. You go to hell the degree you go to yourself. And a lot of the mystics and saints talk about forgiveness as a really big linchpin, because if you're familiar with the Our Father prayer, right? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. So what we are saying every time we say the Our Father is, God, forgive us our trespasses, forgive us our misdeeds, the same way that we forgive the misdeeds that other people do to us. So the way that I forgive my family, the way that I forgive my boss, the way I forgive the terrible people in my life who've done terrible things is the same way I want God to forgive me. God doesn't make an exclusion, right? He doesn't make like some kind of subheading of exception. It's very odd, right? In the Gospels, there is a part where St. Peter is trying to kind of, I don't know, uh, look for loopholes with Jesus, and he's asking Jesus, "Well, how many times must I forgive my brother?" And Jesus says, St. Peter first says, "Do I have to forgive them 7 times?" 7 is the divinely perfect number. So he goes, "Well, should I forgive them 7 times?" And Jesus says, "Oh, 70 times 7." Meaning, sorry, Peter, there are no loopholes. You have to forgive your brother. You have to forgive. And in order to receive the fullness of the love God has, we have to move towards forgiveness. Now, that's very hard, right? And sometimes our capacity is reduced because we're in great amounts of suffering. It does take a level of energy and interest to move towards forgiveness. But there's always a place that's free still, a place that is not damaged by the injuries of other people, and that's important, because a lot of times people will think, well, I've been hurt in this and this and this way. Well, that's true. Maybe somebody has said something terrible about you today. Maybe they said that you were a terrible mother. Maybe they said that they hated your food. Maybe they said that you were terrible and your grades were terrible in school. Maybe, your boss made you feel like a loser. Maybe your spouse, gave you a cold shoulder or was disappointed in you. Okay, that's one thing. But there are so many other places where you remain free. And yet, instead of us moving, we don't train ourselves to move to the places of freedom. Fixating on, instead of fixating on our boss's frustration with us, which we do, and we talk about it with our spouse for 2 hours about how we hate our job and we hate our spouse because they treat us like garbage and overwork us. We don't think about the fact that our children are doing wonderful or that our spouse was home all day taking care of the home. We don't move to those places of freedom. So, again, I've said this before on the podcast. Again, always remember that whatever you focus on gets bigger, and we want to constantly move to a place where you are free. So, when going back to these three components of forgiveness, the first part is truth. So, truth is a very challenging thing for people, and like I said, little kids don't have a problem with truth. They experience truth. They ask profoundly deep questions, right? Because they see things. Adults, we start to make these facades. We look like we know what we're doing. But in truth, if you've never been around adults for very long, pay attention. Adults are just children grown tall, right? I don't care if they're 80. I don't care if they're, 18. Like, adults are children grown tall, and we all have fears. So the first thing is to encounter the truth. So if we think about it, I give you the experience is let's say, for instance, I take my mother's car, I borrow my mother's car as a teenager, and I crash it, right? I crash the car into a pole, right? The truth is that maybe I was looking down and texting somebody. Obviously, when I was learning to drive, you really didn't have any really phones, I think, to text. But you know, the truth is, I hit this pole, right? I hit this pole and I damaged it. I could say to my mom, you know what, somebody hit me. I could say something, but that would be dishonest. So the first part is that I have to kind of encounter the truth, and if I'm the one doing this, my mother has to hear, right, that I damaged her car. That is the truth. To pretend that I didn't would be ridiculous. To pretend that I didn't damage the car and now she owes $3,000, $5,000 to fix the car is also ridiculous. So truth is synonymous with humility, right? Humility is where we begin. If we are the one who has to provide forgiveness, right? So the first part is for my mother, if my mother is the one who has to forgive me, is to encounter the truth and accept me that her 16-year-old son damaged the car, right? He broke the car. The right side is got a huge giant dent in it. To say this didn't happen, that would be weird. And and this is the unique thing. Sometimes people will say, well, someone's in denial. Denial is something that presupposes that you know the truth, because what are you denying? Well, you're denying the truth. So if you think about it, that's why, like, the more people lie, the more that their brains literally, in counterterrorism, they call it cognitive loading, right? There's just so much mental energy to keep these weird stories going that you exhaust your brain by lying all the time. So, the first part is my mother has to accept the truth, or, you have to accept the truth that this person hurt you. This person did whatever it is that they did. And that can take a long time. And it's important, though, to try to, in some regards, to, keep yourself in a place where it's a lot easier if you're in a place of surrendering, a place where you have discipline as a component, right? So a key thing here, I guess, to highlight is, in your life, if you're wanting to get better at forgiveness, you want to keep a high level of discipline and an ability to be uncomfortable, because when things go off the rails, someone breaks your car, breaks your heart, betrays you, you're not going to have your full confidence, your identity tied to this child's behavior, the lover's behavior, the spouse's behavior, your boss's attitude, whatever. Your confidence has to lie with behaviors that are consistent with you. And that's why I keep promoting, especially on this podcast, the importance of developing that image of self that is going to be perfectly reflected, hopefully at the end of your life, through God's grace. So first thing is to be honest and accept the truth. This person hurt me. and to be able to say like what the truth is. Now, when you start to work with the truth, it's important that you start removing judgment. Judgment starts to move us away from the truth. It's hard to do because as human beings, we're constantly evaluating things. But saying things like, "My son is an idiot," right? That's not the truth. That is, that is a judgment, and it's going to push you away from forgiveness. My boss is a jerk. My spouse is a big mouth. My spouse is a selfish pig. My daughter is blah blah, whatever it is. My best friend is just, whatever it is. These things remove us from the truth and remove us from being able to move forward, because with forgiveness, right, we have to hold the reality and we have to be able to give it back. We have to give it back. And sometimes, and we'll talk a little bit about what giving back looks like, right? So, but the first part there is that idea of, the truth. And so, what are the things that you need to accept that are very hard to accept? That's the important part with the truth, because the more that you increase in acceptance, when acceptance goes up, suffering goes down, right? When acceptance goes up, suffering goes down. And so we need to realize that. We need to, study, our own reality sometimes. But we're emotional beings. We get angry. But emotions aren't facts. Emotions aren't facts because they change. And emotions like themselves. So again, you can be upset, you can feel angry, you can feel sad, you can feel any number of things. But when you start to encounter the truth, make sure that you pay attention to where's the judgment, right? Where's the judgment? But so the first thing, though, is to encounter the truth. Figure out what components you're really struggling to accept. For some people, they experience what we call traumatization. Traumatization is in my opinion, and I'm do a whole podcast on it because it is something that people want to talk about, and I feel like people are. I'm very much against this. When people are injured and hurt in this world right now, they are vulnerable, and vulnerable people are at the core. They're just a market, right? So, which is quite terrible to say, but trauma is a business. But when it comes to truth and encountering trauma, and again, I'll go into that more in depth when I go into trauma, is trauma oftentimes comes down to confusion about responsibility, meaning, you know, how come this happened? The 5-year-old who watches their mother get assaulted in front by the mother's boyfriend. Why did that happen? My parents locked me in the closet. Why did that happen? This person sexually assaulted me. Why did that happen? Because there's confusion about responsibility, nobody explains why this happened. There's nobody who came in, no parent, no loving person, especially if we're kids. We don't understand why things happened. The truth is in some ways warped, and sometimes evil gets in there because we start to consent to lies. And that's where a lot of psychological woundedness comes in and really distorts people's experience of relationships and what is possible. And that's sometimes a huge danger with trauma. But when we talk about forgiveness, we're talking about encountering the truth. So sometimes that needs to happen. Sometimes people need to go through work with a priest, a counselor, a psychologist, a specialist of some sort. But the need to figure out, well, again, the responsibility here. Why did this happen? And figuring that out. Now, so again, first part is the truth and the humility. Again, so the second component, right? So if I do have the truth and I can speak the truth, then I start to move with freedom, right? And freedom should make me start to feel powerful, because now I'm going to invite the other person into reality. If the other person is still alive when you do forgiveness, and sometimes you'll communicate this, forgiveness can be spoken and it can also not be spoken. It depends on the nature, right? What's appropriate. But in the situation we're given, if I'm a 16-year-old who's crashed my mother's car and my mother has to accept that I crashed the car, and now she has to, she's going to be, hopefully, she encounters the truth. Her son has damaged the car. There is a reality. What is the reality? The car needs to be paid for. There's $5,000 worth of damage. Somebody has to pay for this car. There is but no one's going to be able to drive it. I'm not going to be able to get to school. This person's going to, my mother's going to have to either get another car or get a rental. And what's going to happen, right? And so at that point, like, that the other person has to communicate the truth with love. This happened. Dan, you crashed the car. Now that you've crashed the car, we don't have a car. And we will, now we're going to need, to pay like $5,000 to our deductible, for, for the car to be repaired. There will be no car that you can drive to school and borrow to go to practices. There's not going to be any, I'm going to have to, have your father drive me to work, or I don't know, what we're going to do, right? And but this is what's going on. So, the freedom. So we encounter the truth, but then we have to speak the truth. Right. This is a big problem. So if you think about this, honesty, right? So truth in motion is honesty communicated, right? Truth in motion is honesty communicated, meaning that this is now drawing me into reality, right? Out of the shame. Okay, yeah, you screwed up, you crashed the car, whatever. But this is the reality. This needs, because now I have to figure out, again, if forgiveness involves a living person, that other person then has to be invited. They get invited into reality. They get invited into taking responsibility for the reality that they've, produced, right? So if you've been hurt by your spouse, you've been hurt by your parents, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your best friend, your boss, it's going to be important sometimes. And again, some of this may not be communicated. Some of this may be happening in your mind as well. But if you're as a real person and it's appropriate for them to understand what's going on, is to say this happened, right? This is what's happened, right? Because to say nothing and just to be kind will make you very sick, right? As they say, to sometimes to keep your peace, so to speak, or I would say to have peace at any price sometimes is to create war inside yourself. And that becomes dangerous. So we want to, the truth should start to produce freedom. I'm not going to put this blame on me. My mother's not going to say I crashed the car, because she didn't. That's a lie. The person who was assaulted isn't going to say I deserved it. That's a lie. That's not the truth. That would be a terrible identity to say I deserve to be abused as a child. I deserve this person to crash the car. I deserve the betrayal of my boss. I had it coming to me. That is in many ways a pretty dangerous mentality. It is the mentality of criminality and forensics too, by the way. Years ago, I worked with a gentleman, just an aside, but I worked with a gentleman, and he was, I would say, a nefarious criminal, to put it politely, right? He was known, he was regularly arrested over the 4 years that we worked together. He was regularly arrested by various governmental agencies. And periodically, like, he would show up when he wasn't in lockup. But because he was an informant for all these governmental and police agencies, they would let him go, catch him. They played this game with him. And the one day he showed up to his appointment, like, I don't know, 50 minutes late, right? And I asked him, like, why are you late? And you still showed up 5 minutes late. He's like, well, man, I respect your time. And I'm like, well, like, what happened? He goes, well, I was sitting in my truck and I was having a smoke, and then this guy came in and he put a gun to my head, and he stole my car and he took off with it. I said, oh man, that's pretty terrible. He's like, honestly, man, it's just what happens. It's just what happens when you play the game. And again, the street mentality, there really is no forgiveness, because there is really no truth, and there is no, real freedom, and then there really is any love, because there's no order, right? It's just melee, right? And that's where we're heading, I think, in the general culture, is we have deception instead of truth, we have slavery instead of freedom, and then we have apathy instead of love. And that's what I see. So that's, so with freedom, you should be able to communicate honestly. You should be able to communicate honestly, and that engages people, keeps them in the adventure of the relationship. And it also should remove the tension in you, right? And again, you don't want to do this from an emotional only place, because feelings change and consequences don't. And sometimes it's not prudent to speak of these things, but it is important. You will have something that you will do that will produce freedom and take and be able to move forward, right? But because once you see what you have, you can give it back, and then you can go to the next thing. But you have to be free. So my mom, I crashed the car. That's what's happened. You know, I've been hurt by this person. That's what's happened. I experienced this. I talk about this. I communicate, the truth now. This happened to me. This was upsetting. I have no car anymore. I felt terribly sad. I felt abandoned. Whatever the case may be. However you were hurt, right? And then the thing is that once you are able to speak the truth, whether it's internally through your own dialogue with, or whether it's with the other person, then you have to tell the person what you're going to do next, right? This is important because a lot of times what people want is they want to make a request and demand something. If you make a request and demand something, that's different than expressing a need. If you make a demand and request something, you've stayed in bondage with this other person, because now they still have a hold on you. And if they have a hold on you, well, then you really haven't forgiven. You're going to come back to this place because it's still got a grip on you. It's important that we move beyond this. And so in the case of the car as a simple thing, and then I'll use maybe something more dramatic, this is what has happened. We don't got the money, blah, blah, blah. And this is what's going to happen is you're going to have to take your bike to school, right? And don't ask me to use the car right now. You're not going to be able to use the car, until this is either you've helped pay this off, right? Because this is got to repair the damage that you caused to the car. And I would recommend that you get your own car, because again, forgiveness doesn't mean that you're going to forget. The memory is important. It's just hard to manage the memory because memory and emotion are connected. But I'm not going to forget. I'm not going to forget what this person has done, right? So I would hope my mom doesn't just give me the car back after I crash it. There needs to be, she has to tell me what's going to happen, right? So for her to express the need, and again, the need is a response to reality. You got to pay for this. This is what's got to happen. We're not going to have a car. If you want to be able to drive the car again, you're going to have to repair this. And so forgiveness kind of moves us back to a state of responsibility for the other person. It invites them to responsibility. If somebody betrays your trust, let's say you find out that they've been talking about you behind your back, which happens quite frequently, or they're texting people, or they've cut you out of things. But let's just say, for instance, they've decided to talk about you behind your back, say mean things to your children, or to your husband, or your boyfriend, or whoever it is, or your girlfriend. Well, again, you have to. What is it that I need to accept? What is the truth? This person did this. Please get to a place where we can accept the truth. And again, it's easier to accept the truth if you've engaged in the difficulties of life. If you have a very comfortable life, it's very hard to encounter the truth sometimes. We do not want to admit it because it's very challenging, believe it or not. But then, again, I have to say, like, okay, this has happened, right? When you did this, when you said these things, I felt incredibly sad and I felt hurt, and because of that, and then you have to be able to say what you're going to do, because you have to choose to do something freely. Cutting people out of your life. So this is the big challenge, right? Cutting people out of your life is a unique thing. I guess we have the luxury of cutting people out of our life now. And so when I say that you have this freedom, like freedom is not freedom to cut people out so much, because I mean, for all intents and purposes, I would say that there's a whole lot of people that are dead that people have never forgiven, right? They've never forgiven. And these people are all dead, right? So, I mean, there's still a lot of unforgiveness, I would say generational pain. And these people that are still alive, like, They don't have to cut anybody out. Those people are dead. Remember, back in the day, we understood that we belong to each other, that human beings are connected, right? Even if I hate this group, it doesn't stop the hate, right? People see this all the time, right? So, super important. So now for the third component when we talk about forgiveness today, which really is this ability that we move to freedom to love, right? There is a movement, right? I accept what's happened. I encounter the truth of what's happened. Make a choice to communicate with honesty, right? And then out from that, that experience has to move. It has to leave me, and as it leaves me, my freedom always produces, will produce a virtue and has the capacity then to increase my ability to love, right? And so in that experience, then, right, if you're going to say that you've forgiven somebody, the way you check if your forgiveness is intact is, are you free to love them? So, for instance, if somebody has hurt you terribly but they're dead, do you pray for their soul? If you are unable to pray for their soul because, well, I hope they're in hell, well, that's a sign that you're not forgiven, right? If you say you've forgiven your boss, well, are you able to recognize your boss's birthday? Are you able to give your friend a compliment who betrayed you? Are you free? When we move to forgiveness, we are free, and then we are free to love. And so you can check, right? You can check, your psychological and spiritual flexibility by if you're able to do that, right? And so a lot of times I think people will say, "Well, I've forgiven this person," and then they wonder why. So because forgiveness is the title of this episode. Forgiveness is weird. Martin Luther King Jr. Had this mentality that forgiveness was not necessarily a choice, but it was an attitude. It was an attitudinal movement. Like it was an orientation of being. And so you'll find people who are incredible at forgiveness. They skip things, right? They skip whole experiences of resentment, right? And they move right into love, right? They move right into love. You see that with Gandhi. Gandhi, when he was shot and assassinated, before he hit the ground, he immediately turned to the person who had shot him, forgave him, said he loved him, and then he hit the dirt, right? So there was a cultivation, I would hope, in Gandhi himself, where he was creating the space to love more. And if we have more love inside of ourselves, and we've chosen that regularly throughout the day, well, then we have more of a Teflon mind. We are able to let go of things because we cling to nothing. As Christ, I think, illustrates in his life, and the saints do the same, is that when we cling to nothing, we can easily, I won't say easy, but more easily forgive, because there's no room for resentment. There's no room for resentment if we're trying to increase in love. It literally blocks us. It prevents us from moving towards the person we want to be. And if it blocks us from moving towards that person that we want to be, well, then what it's going to do is produce anxiety, stress, depression, cancer, physical cancer, stress, and we're going to probably die, and our overall health is going to be worse. People who are resentful, so the word resentment means to re-feel things, to re-experience things. So I'll double back to my conversation earlier on the episode where I said that that you can choose to forgive, right? You can orientate yourself to forgive, and yet you're not going to be able to remove the memory, right? And so again, you don't. It's like if my mom forgives me from crashing the car, she's not just going to give me the car back, right? If you forgive the person who hurt you or your best friend for betraying you, you're not just going to forget that that person, betrayed you. You're not going to probably talk about your personal stuff around that person because trust has been damaged, and that is not something that is easily rebuilt, and that's something that you can choose to, produce again. You can choose to trust people or not. But memory and emotion are located in similar regions of the brain. That's why, when you have a feeling, you have a memory, and when you have a memory, you have a feeling. And sometimes people want to work on emotional regulation, and actually, we go really very deep into this, and a lot of people found this to be helpful on our marriage program, is how to regulate the emotional system, and deal with the memory recall of resentment, because that refeeling of things is going to make people in your life wear emotional wallpaper. You're going to have if you have an injury from somebody in grade school, you're going to project that onto your boss or your spouse or your in-laws or whatever. Issues with your parents, issues with teachers, issues with an ex. Easily you can hold these things, and instead of letting them go, and we just hold on to them and we block them, well, now they prevent us from seeing people. They prevent us from giving and receiving love. And that's why, Martin Luther King Jr. said that he chose to love people because hate was too much to bear. And I think people, I think people just don't understand that, right? I mean, the Chinese have a great saying that if you have a grudge, which again is similar to a resentment, this ill will for people, like I will evil into them, right? I hope that they die. I hope that their family dies. I hope that they lose their money. Those are curses, right? We would say, those are actual curses, believe it or not. And maybe I'll do a whole episode on what curses are, because it is a spiritual reality. Curses do kill people, do it make people ill. They really do exist, and they have forever. But the Chinese have this saying that if you have a grudge, you have to dig two graves, one for your enemy and one for yourself, because these grudges destroy us. They eat us away from the inside out. And so we want to remove this. So again, in review of this, right? We want to first encounter the truth of what's happened, whether it's, yes, my sibling lied about me, my boss betrayed my trust, my spouse broke my heart, my friend, stole money from whatever it is, somebody injured me, somebody has abused me, neglected me. That there's a truth to that. Encounter what it is that you struggle to accept. Because once you get to, and maybe this is something that, I should have said earlier, is with the things that happen to us sometimes, I think the most difficult things for us to sometimes forgive are the things that shock us, right? They shock us because we have a high level of expectation. We expect our parents will love us, and they didn't. They failed. They abused us. We expected our boss, who we were the best man at his wedding, to be there for us, but he instead sends us down the river, and we end up losing our job. We expect that our in-laws are going to be there for us and support us, but we find out that they're telling our children bad things about us behind our back, whatever it is. So there's a level of expectation, and then when we meet with that reality, there is a shock. And so it's super important that we remove this surprise. You should not be surprised by the humanity you find in other people, because think about it. You do all types of stupid things every day. I do all types of bad things, stupid things, but I don't hate myself. I don't really yeah, I do get upset with myself. Yeah, sometimes I feel guilt for things, but I don't just I can't cut myself away from myself. I can't just say well, I hate myself, never going to deal with me again. And so that's why this whole idea of toxic people and cutting people out is really problematic, because it destroys our humanity, and we feel almost justified in it. So back to my point, I guess, is that with the truth, you have to figure out, what is it that I need to accept that I'm really struggling with? Because the more you increase in acceptance, the more the suffering goes down, right? If I have more acceptance, the suffering goes down, because suffering is a judgment, right? It's a judgment about an experience. Difficulties happen, pain happens of all types, emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual, but the judgment about it is what is extends and really creates that suffering, because it's where we start, in that judgment, we start relying on ourselves, and in that reliance on ourselves, we start pulling further and further away from God, further and further away from reality, and we enter into ourself. Figure out what it is, whoever it is that you're really struggling to forgive. Think about, number one, what is it that I'm really struggling to accept? Then think about what it is that needs to be said out loud in terms of what is the truth. And it does not mean you're going to say that truth to that person, because that person, like I said, they may be dead, or it may not be prudent. So you have to figure out, like what needs to be said, because you have to come up with a narrative. The brain, as I've talked about in this podcast, the brain works in a story. And so you are going to tell this story to somebody. It may just be yourself, but you are going to talk about it. And you may talk about it with your spouse, about your family member who died, that you resented and how you've gotten over it and what happened, or your boss that you don't see anymore, but you ran into him at the grocery store and said, "Oh, there has to be a truth though that is spoken." And because when the story changes, when the honesty comes, honesty is the curative factor. Honesty ties us to reality, ties us to the life that is real. And so then there's the truth, and then there's that increase of freedom, the freedom to speak the truth with love, right? And so that movement of freedom, right? And from that freedom immediately moves into a loving action, right? So whether it is, being able to pray for the person, whether it is, to permit the person some type of experience that maybe you would cut them off from, in the sense that maybe you freely now, in the case of maybe my example about crashing my mother's car, well, maybe after my mother has forgiven me and she has an acceptance of it, again, maybe she will say, yes, I love you. And she accepts the fact that I'm a screw up and I could break her car again, but she lends me the car. Again, she has to do it freely. She has to do it with full knowledge that I could screw it up again. I could hurt the car, right? And again, if she's been able to say her piece and we've encountered reality, well, then she probably has no problem with that. We probably both have grown up. Forgiveness forces us to grow up. It forces us to become more like God, to become more detached from people. That is one of the reasons why God permits us, I think, to harm each other, because obviously he doesn't like to see his children fight, but we certainly do it in our families, probably at a higher level than other people, right? The more similar we are to people personality-wise, the more similar we are, the more we have a greater expectation that people should be a certain way, right? So we can't tolerate the people that go to church with us. We can't tolerate the Protestants down the street. We can't tolerate the people we go to college with. But we definitely can't stand sometimes, like, the people in our family. We want to cut them out. We want to throw them away. We want to call them crazy. We want to get rid of them. And so again, like, think about that as the second component there. Okay. Think about that experience of freedom, right? And from that place of freedom, then comes that loving action, right? You start playing, as I've said in earlier podcasts, these infinite games. You start participating in some form of loving action, some form of constructive and loving action, but you're no longer destructive. Remember, when there's unforgiveness, there is destruction. There is the deconstruction of people. There is, a self-destruction, and there is an implosion of relationships. It's very hard. You'll see people who have resentment. They're easy to find because they have very few friends. You'll see people who have terrible unforgiveness because they have very poor friendships, very, very shallow friendships and relationships, in part because they're almost absorbed by how much resentment they have. And again, it's like, goes back to the Our Father prayer: deliver us, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. You cannot escape that, right? That reality that, as you hand out judgment, that judgment comes back to you. It's terrifying. And again, I would suspect, although I've never been to hell in the physical sense, I've been there mentally a bunch of times. I think that most of the people that are in hell at times on earth are in a state of unforgiveness. And so if you can, again, these are things that if you were really struggling with, go to confession, tell the priest, I resent this person. You consent. When you resent, you consent to refeel things, to feed these seeds of hate and resentment. And then it takes away your energy and it blinds you from the things that are good. It blinds you from the love of your children or of your spouse or of the people that work with you or of the person you're dating or your parents because you are so consumed with this person. Hopefully this is a good starting point, to end on. So I appreciate you for sticking with me during this first attempt at the visual podcast as well as the audio. Keep your questions coming in. If you've got follow-up, I do check the emails. I do check your comments and everything about the the podcast. If you know anybody that is looking to be more than just a roommate with their spouse, check out or have them check out our online marriage program at heartsrenewed.org. We have a ton of free, we've got at least 4 resources now, great resources for married couples and families. So check those out. And I will be back again next week. I do believe next week we're going to take a little bit of a detour into the link between your mood, the food you eat, and the health of your gut. So it should be as my wife would say, it'll be a nerd out, I guess. I guess it'll be I got to nerd out someplace. So you guys have a great rest of your day and smuggle some hope wherever you can.